Hi, welcome to the Poetry of Tarot. What we're doing basically is a series right now on the Major Arcana, looking at tarot as poetry and also looking at the tarot through poetry that I have written about it. So I'd like to start, as I start all of these, with an image of the Rider-Waite-Smith. This is the Hierophant from the Rider-Waite-Smith, painted by Pamela Coleman Smith in 1909. So it is going back a ways, although the oldest tarots from the Renaissance period. So 1909 is still, relatively recent. But this is an iconic tarot. This is a tarot that has had such a huge influence on many of the tarot decks that are out there, and many of the ones you'll be using, that it's a good place to start. The Hierophant was originally called the Pope card. And as you can see, this is a Christian leader, the Pope, with the triple crown on his head, one hand raised in blessing and the other holding a scepter with a triple cross. And you can see he's dressed in red, the color of royalty. There are two monks are in obeisance, obviously, very much lowered in his presence. Between them, however, are the keys. And the idea being that somehow this Pope, this Hierophant, has the keys that will let you in on whatever the secrets are that you need to know. He is between two pillars in the same way that the High Priestess is. They're not specifically the pillars of Solomon, and certainly if they are, they're very ill drawn for that because they don't have the roses at the top. During the time that the cards really were first popular, the church and the monarchies in Europe were the two powers, and sometimes they worked together and sometimes they worked against each other. So that Greek word, the Hierophant, has replaced the Pope, and in a lot of newer decks you're going to see different names for this card. A lot of times people talk about this card as the card of tradition, but in my experience with the card, it comes up most of the time when the situation has to do with something that's institutionalized. Institutionalized religion, schools, universities, hospitals, anything that's an institution seems to come up through the Hierophant card for me for some reason. So I don't know if that's true for everyone. But that's what's happened for me as a reader. As someone who is not of this faith, this card does really nothing for me. It is also just reinforcing that whole idea that there is some kind of person who has to be a bridge between you and the knowledge of the divine. And the tarot actually seems to be something that's saying the exact opposite, which is if you take this journey, if you follow these steps, you will encounter the mystery, you will encounter the divine. As with the Emperor, this is a difficult card for me. When you live in a system that tells you this is what's right and wrong, and I get to decide what's right and wrong, and you don't, and if that means, for example, that people who are LGBTQ, well, that's too bad. You're just outside the realm of goodness and you're not savable. I can't buy into any of those kinds of systems. I cannot buy into a system that excludes people, and I cannot buy into a system that is hierarchical. And like the Emperor that we just saw, who believed that his power was divinely given, this is also obviously true of the Pope. And the Pope's power supposedly came directly through Jesus, who chose St. Peter, and then all of from St. Peter on, all the popes were then chosen by a council of essentially church nobility. Which I had to do some searching to find out how are more contemporary artists looking at this card, and is there a way to see this in a positive way? It's not that I don't think that tradition can be important. I feel like I grew up with certain traditions that are very important to me, and I would miss them if they weren't there. But if tradition becomes all important and rules your life, then we have a problem. And I guess that's basically what we're going to be exploring as we look at the Hierophant card. This first card we're going to be looking at is from the Golden Tarot by Kat Black. It's a wonderful collage deck that came out in 2003. The decks were made completely from Renaissance paintings. And so I'm sure it was not hard for her to find this image to use as the Hierophant. He wears that particular kind of hat that the Pope wears. He carries a staff, which is reminiscent of Jesus, who was supposed to be shepherding his flock. He has the keys around his neck. Interestingly, he has red around his collar, but the rest is kind of an orangey color. It's a more subdued color than the actual red. He is, however, between two pillars, as in the Rider-Waite-Smith. In a cathedral, there are at least there are two people, one of whom seems to be a nun, who are clearly inferior to him and looking to him for instructions or are in his service. So let me read the poem and then we can talk about it a little bit more. Empty box. He looks down his long nose, sneering at whatever has caught his attention. You don't want his eyes to fall on you. His staff is made of gold and etched with secret symbols and words that keep intruders out. He keeps the keys on a cord hanging close to his chest. He doesn't know that what they guard is an empty box. He is as tall as the white pillars that hold up this church. You would never want to know him. So for me, this is very much a shadow image of the Hierophant. This one who is looking sneeringly down his nose at everyone, who is carrying gold, who has keys to secrets. I think I wrote this poem 3 years ago, so now I'm thinking, what is the empty box that I was thinking about? And what it is actually is not in the picture, but which I know is behind him, and that is the tabernacle. And I'm also saying that that box of tradition is not a tradition that is feeding anyone, that is taking care of anyone. One of the things about people who are in this kind of position is that they are judgmental. And during the Renaissance and shortly before it, the Dark Ages, you had the Inquisition. And so if you weren't Catholic, if you were a woman, possibly just because you were a woman and a healer and possibly a midwife, you would be declared a witch and you could be burned. And I don't know, I don't remember the numbers now, but millions of women were. Jews also were tortured, were killed, were expelled from countries because they were not Catholic. So this is from a time that religion, instead of being something that creates community, that creates a spiritual environment, is something that creates division, creates hatred, judgment, all kinds of things that are not particularly nutritious, shall we say, to the human soul. So if I did a reading and I use this deck, I would not be happy if I saw that. I do have to say that for me, however, this card has transformed into simply meaning institutions. And so anything that's institutionalized, if this comes up in a reading for me, I know I'm going to have to deal with an institution. I felt very much those kinds of eyes looking at me. I think those of us who grew up in religious traditions in which people were ready to blame, didn't want the eyes of the priest or the bishop or the hierophant or the nun or whatever looking at you, because if they saw you, they would find something wrong. And that is again a very, very shadow side to the Hierophant. But I wanted to start with this card because it is probably the closest to the Rider-Waite-Smith. This next card is from the Dreaming Way Tarot. And you can say again that it is a traditional Hierophant. He's got that hat. Wow, that hat is like so huge. It's got the cross at the top of it. He's old. He's old enough that he looks like he's fallen asleep in his chair in the woods, you know, sort of in a warm coat of some kind. The keys, if you notice, have been tied into the tree. And so I look at this card, and I had a very mixed feeling towards this card. And I'd like to read the poem first. It's called Maybe. The shape of his body is echoed in the tiers of his hat, the wide bottom and pointed top, like a Gothic window. He sits in the midst of a grove of young trees, the back of his white chair curved like the lips of a lily. He seems to be asleep. His gray beard rests on his ochre scarf. Two big buttons hold his brown coat closed over his chest. His hands fall into his lap. Above him, behind him, are the keys he's tied to the tree. Maybe he's forgotten them. Maybe he will see them when he wakes. Maybe he doesn't need them anymore. So I think it's a mistake to think that somebody, because they are in a particular tradition that you don't agree with, can't have a spirituality or can't have, deep goodness in them. And I think it's also a mistake to think that our spirituality stays the same through our whole life. So here is an image of an old man who has reached some high position in whatever church he's in. It looks like it might be like perhaps Russian Orthodox. And I'm looking at him and I'm going, okay, this old man has given his whole life to this. And there's something about the fact that he's hung up the keys in the tree. And also the way that chair branches out behind him like a lily, like a white lily, which we know in the tarot, the white lilies mean purity. So I look at him and he's wearing the white headdress. He's in a white lily-like chair. His eyes are closed. He's either sleeping or meditating, looking within. He's in this dark brown coat that for me really grounds him amidst all these trees. He's not in a church. He's out in the woods. What is this man thinking about? What is going on with him? And for me, the keys became part of the key to what was going on. And that was, he's put the keys behind him. He's old. He may or may not remember they're there. He might see them when he wakes up, or he might not. Maybe, just maybe, he doesn't need them anymore. Maybe, this part isn't in the poem, maybe he doesn't need the keys because he's found his real spirituality now. Perhaps he has become the Hierophant, the one who can teach us the secrets, of spirituality, because he's let go of tradition, or he's able to read tradition in such a way as to make sense, as to be nourishing, as to be a real spiritual path. So I really appreciated this card. I appreciated this Hierophant. If I saw this in a reading, I would think maybe there's somebody in my life who has some information for me, some wise elder who I might look up to. And that's a very hopeful card in comparison to the first two, the Rider-Waite-Smith and the one from the Golden Tarot, where he's sort of sneering down his nose at you. This one, as I said, I feel like it doesn't matter what tradition someone's coming from. People can find their spiritual road. And he's let go of the keys, perhaps because he doesn't need them. This next card is from the Tarot in Wonderland, and I wanted a card that would be lighthearted at this point, but also profound in some ways. This is Alice. She's in Wonderland, and this is the Cheshire Cat who shows up at different times, and we know is unstable because sometimes her mouth is simply the moon, and so we know that we know the moon waxes and wanes. Well, let me read you the poem, and then we'll talk about it a little bit. She's always believed, meaning Alice. She's always believed that cats know everything. This cat in a tree can tell her the rules, why to go one way and not another, or why it doesn't matter. She's always full of good advice. And so I wanted to write a short, lighthearted poem because this cat is always full of good advice. But the advice is something like this: well, you could go that way, but maybe you should go that way. Or it doesn't really matter which way we go because we're all mad here. So she gives advice. She always has something to say, but whether or not the advice is helping Alice in any way is questionable. And so that's a funny card, and you can just like have it slip by. But if I got it in a reading, what would I think? Well, there are these false hierophants, these false gurus, these false leaders who show up and always have the answer, don't they? And don't they always want to tell us what the answer is and what road we should go down and why, or why not go down the road we're already very happily going down? And I think that this card, I would have to say, is there somebody in my life right now who's giving me advice that may or may not be good advice? Is there someone who's putting themselves up on, above me as somebody who knows better than I do, who's telling me things to do? And am I following their directions? Or am I letting myself think for myself? So especially in this time where we are having that go on all the time, I think that this is a much more profound card than it looks like when you just first look at it. It's like, oh yeah, we all know the Cheshire Cat. Yes, we do. And the Cheshire Cat appears in many guises, and I think is appearing quite often out there in the world today. So taking a look at this card and saying, She always has good advice, but is this advice useful to me? Is this advice true? Is this advice helpful? I just think that it's actually a really brilliant look at this difficult card. Who's the one who's always telling you what to do? Who's the one who's got the advice? Oh, yes, the Cheshire Cat. As constant as the moon, all right? Waning and waxing. Sometimes there, sometimes not. Sometimes right, sometimes can't see too clearly by this light. That's the Hierophant, and that's my take on this particular card. This next card is another card from the Tarot of Mystical Moments, and as you can see, it's MJ Cullinan's beautiful artwork. And I wanted to have this one right after Alice because it's sort of the opposite. Here's this girl at the top of a tree listening to an owl reading from a book. And I thought, this is so wonderful because, of course, the owl is connected with Athena, the goddess of wisdom. So she is reading by moonlight. It's not a full moon, but it is a 3/4 moon. And the girl she's in her dress. She's not in her PJs. And she's listening. And this is the poem. It's called 3/4 Moon. The huge barred owl sits at the very top of the tree, damaged by lightning, but still standing. The waxing 3/4 moon is visible through a break in the clouds. The girl sits comfortably on an outstretched limb, her chin resting in her hands. It's not what the owl reads from the open book, held by a helpful twig, but the stories he'll tell around it. She'll gladly sit here until morning, in her jeans and t-shirt, climb down in time for breakfast. Her mother will say, "You're up early, dressed already?" What I want to say is that I used a little bit of poetic license there. I took her out of the dress because I wanted to bring her up to date, and I put her in jeans and a t-shirt. And I also didn't, this has to do with sound. This has to do with me as a poet. I didn't want to use the word dress twice. And I really wanted to have her mother say, "Dressed already?" So I did do that little change. But let's take a look at this image. This huge barred owl. The barred owl here is one that we hear a lot, called monkey-faced owls. And we have stories about them here in the Northeast. I love it that this owl is teaching her and that she is willing to sit up there all night long and listen. And then the important thing for me is, wow, it's not the stories it's not what she's reading from the book. It's the stories she tells around them. And what I have found from every teacher who's been really important in my life is there are those things that we read, that a teacher might read to us from a book in class, or that we all read and then discuss in class. And it's invariably the stories around the stories that are the important thing, are the things that move my heart, that touch me. And so I wanted to put that into the poem. It's not what the owl reads from that open book, but the stories he'll tell around it. Yes, yes, tell me a story. I think that stories are the way that human beings make meaning. And becoming a good reader is partly becoming a good storyteller. How do I take these cards that have just come out? I've shuffled the deck. These cards have come out. How do I turn them into a story that has meaning? Because that's what stories are for. They are to create meaning in a world that can sometimes seem like there's no meaning at all, like things are just happening randomly and Yikes. So if you can become like the owl, if you can read the book, in this case, the book being the tarot, and then tell the stories around it, then you are doing what a reader needs to do. So this particular Hierophant card has become important to me as kind of a card of a tarot reader, as well as a teacher. It's obviously a teacher card, but it's very much about that this tarot that we're working with it is a book, and it is a sacred text, and it is the stories that we tell around it and through it. And unlike most books, we get to shuffle the pages every time that we read it. And so it's going to be different every time. And so our developing strengths as a storyteller are so important to our strengths as a reader. So I happen to love this card. I hope you do. And that's the Hierophant from the Tarot of Mystical Moments. This card is from a deck that's fairly new to me. I had it for a couple of years and put it away, and actually pretty much forgot that I had it, and just recently rediscovered it. Förhäxa is a Swedish word that means to be enchanted. And it is, in fact, a kingdom that was created for this deck. This is the Hierophant in the Förhäxa Tarot. And you can see some of the images there. We are in a forest. You can see the light coming up. It looks like it's dawn light. We can see a red deer in the dawn light. That's huge in comparison to the shape of the woman who is digging at the roots of the tree. And then underneath, we can see the actual roots extending in the rhizomes. I like that the roots are white. And then there's these two rivers down there. So I thought I would give this one a try. And it's called Beneath the Ground. A red deer, enormous in the morning light, and she digging at the roots of the tree. Snowdrops are blooming. The sap is just beginning to run. Beneath the ground, roots reach out to rhizomes, to rivers of fire and water. So this is a woman who, in early spring, at the very time when the sap is just beginning to rise, gets up at dawn, sees this red deer that's so much bigger than her. There are red deer in the forests of England. That's the red hart, the counterpart to the spirit animal that we saw that was the white hart. But this animal is so huge that it feels very much like a spirit animal to me as well. This big, red, huge deer. It's almost as if this card has been reversed. I feel like under the ground, we're actually seeing what looks so much like a sky, as if those roots are electric, as if there's a storm going on under there. But also, I'm seeing rivers under there. I'm seeing one river that's all red, and I'm seeing a river that's blue. It feels like those rhizomes, those roots are reaching into a place where this woman, the Hierophant, who is searching for spiritual truth, knows that's where it will be found. It will be found in these rivers, these deep rivers of the unconscious that are fire and water and air. And so I thought that was an interesting take on the Hierophant, bringing it back into the human realm, even though it's actually, Förhäxa is actually a Fey realm. So this would be a Fey healer or Fey Hierophant who would be doing this work. It feels like the work that a witch would do, that somebody who is very connected to the earth would do. It feels also like the work those of us do if we want to read it metaphorically, with the images rather than in any literal way, that we are reaching down into those rivers, you know, those deep rivers of fire, of life, of water, of life and the subconscious, you know, of air, of those storms, of the mentality, and deep into the earth. So all of the elements are there in this card, and I find that that makes it a very strong Hierophant card. If I got this card in a reading, I would think, I have some work to do. I should be out there digging in this tree. I need to dip into those rivers. I need to do that work. And also, if it was after a time, for example, of a bad time or a depressive time or whatever, I would go like, this is spring. And not only is it spring, it's morning. Those are snowdrops that are those flowers that we're seeing there. And we're seeing the first rays of the sun. And this red deer feels very auspicious. It feels, it's interesting because it's that red color, which is connected sometimes with the Hierophant in the old cards. And yet it's a red deer. So there's this very physical energy that's there as well. So it's sort of like a spirit deer that has to do with physical energy. There's so many different layers. I feel like I could look at this card for a long time and find many, many different readings in it. So I want, again, to just say, if you haven't taken a look at the Förhäxa Tarot, it is magnificent. It is beautifully, the art in it is beautiful, and I have found many, many images in it that are just very full of depth and make me think about things in a different way. This next card I want to show you is from the Cat Tarot, another deck that is a lighthearted deck, but this card is anything from lighthearted as far as I can see. If you take a look at the beautiful watercolor that it is, you can see that this is an older cat. It's a big fluffy gray cat. But this cat has experience. This cat has lost an eye in a fight or something like that. This is not a cat you're going to approach without being a little bit careful, without being a little bit respectful. I'm kind of fascinated by the two crows that are above its head because crows chatter all the time. And I'm not sure quite what that bunting is. It looks like it might just be some kind of reference back to it being in a special place, as the Hierophant was in the RWS cards. So what I'd like to do is read you the poem, and then we can talk a little bit more. The poem is called Anything. He's lost an eye in some fight or other, a long time ago. He can see just fine out of the one that's left, green as an emerald in his face. He's solid with his broad back, tail curled around him, head turned to face you. Over his head, two crows sit on a white bunting. They are always chattering. Sometimes he listens, sometimes not. If you have the courage, he may let you approach and not walk away. If he does, you can ask him anything. So I love this cat, and I love it as a Hierophant cat, and also to talk about sort of in response to the Cheshire cat that we saw earlier. This is a very different cat. This is not a cat that's going to ask, give you advice that you didn't ask for. This is a cat that's going to wait for you to approach it and then decide whether or not to just walk away, or whether to you are worthy of its notice. It doesn't seem an aggressive cat at all, but it also seems like a cat that may or may not put up with you. It's got that look on its face of, yeah, I'm the one who decides. And I like this very much as kind of a depiction of what the unconscious is like. The unconscious gets to decide if we are worthy. We're the ones who have to approach, and we have to have courage to do it. Not everyone is going to approach this cat. It looks a little fearsome. Looks a little bit like, yeah, I don't know. If I put my hand out to this cat, is this cat going to scratch me, or is this cat going to, just walk away if I approach it, and I'm going to feel, bad and humiliated somehow, and rejected. This cat takes a little bit of patience, and also a little bit of, I almost want to say, compassion and welcome on your part. In other words, are you worthy of its taking notice? This cat has been in fights. This cat's had a lot of experience. This cat's not going to waste its time with anything that is not important. So I think that is a really interesting image of having to be worthy, having to have courage, number one, and then hoping that it won't just walk away, but also knowing that if it doesn't walk away, you can ask it anything. I love that. I've been reading one of Rachel Pollack's books. I think it's A Walk Through the Forest of Souls. And she talks about, why don't we ask the tarot the big questions, like, why are we here? What's the plan for the universe? She's actually just amazingly courageous in the kinds of questions she's willing to put out there, and then to sort of dip into the deep rivers of knowledge and see what she gets. So there is this element of courage in being able to approach this cat. The opposite of the Cheshire Cat. This is not a cat that's going to be giving you advice or telling you you're doing the right thing or the wrong thing or whatever. It's going to assume you're a grown-up. It's going to assume that you have a conscience. It's going to assume a lot of things about you if, in fact, it's going to allow you to approach. I said earlier I was kind of fascinated by those crows. I love crows. I love them in real life. I love that they chatter all the time. And I know that their chatter is not just empty sound, but that in fact they have crow languages, and that they are talking to each other and having conversations. The cat listens sometimes and sometimes doesn't. And I think that capacity or that ability is really important. Because if we look at the card in terms of like, what are those crows in terms of our lives? Well, they might be real crows if you are a crow person, but they could also be those voices that are always chattering in our heads. And sometimes we have to pay attention. Sometimes they're telling us important things. And sometimes we have to do the mundane things of life. We have to buy the groceries and do the dishes and pick up, the kids, or do whatever events we have signed up for. But sometimes, and especially if we're going to talk to this cat, we have to learn how not to pay attention to those that constant chattering that's out there. And in the world we're living in now, and man, it is so different than the world I grew up in. When I walk into a place and everyone is plugged into their phone, and the number of hours people spend plugged into their phone, whether it's playing games, whether it's social media, whatever it is they're doing. They're spending hours and hours and hours of the day doing that. Sometimes we need to put the phone down. Sometimes we need not to listen if we're going to get the attention of this cat. Well, here's another lighthearted card. The Fey Tarot. And in this tarot, the Hierophant is called the Wisest. And if you see it, you can see the man. He's sitting on top of an hourglass, on top of that same hourglass that the high priestess was sitting in front of a door with that same hourglass. So that that idea of time passing is there. And look at the size of the red dragon who's curled around him with the tail. He is there writing down with this long, long plume, presumably something that the dragon has been saying or some ideas that have been coming because of this dragon. So I want to read the poem. It's called Living with a Dragon. This round man sits on an hourglass, his legs dangling, his wind-blown hair and thick beard whiter than the scroll spilling from his lap and over his sandaled feet. The red dragon, curled up next to him like a favorite cat, encircles him with her tail, her eyes green and slitted, horns ringed and branched like trees. His feathered pen unfurls above his shoulder as he writes in red ink or blood. Is this what it is to be wise? Living with a dragon, translating her words. I had to think about it. How is this a Hierophant? What has this got to do with tradition, with knowledge, with spiritual knowledge? And then I thought, it's all about the dragon. Look at the dragon. If your job is to live with this dragon, to make friends with this dragon, to learn the speech of the dragon, and then to write down her words, is that what it is to be wise? Is that what it is? Does the deepest knowledge of our unconscious, of our deepest soul place, is it like a dragon? Do we have to learn a special language? Do we have to court it? It does seem that way with intuition sometimes. We have to, we have to be there with arms wide open. We have to be in service to it. And so I think I actually took to this card first as a poet, because I was like, oh yes, writing a poem. It's the dragon, the dragon speaks and you write the poem. And if you're lucky, the dragon speaks. So part of it was sort of the dragon is muse. But in this card, the Hierophant, the dragon as the source of real spiritual knowledge is also terrific and immense, because look at the size of the dragon. This is immense amount of knowledge. And he is trying in the best way he can to write it down. And he's writing it down in red. So we don't know if that's red ink or if he's actually writing it in his own blood, that it's that precious that he would write in his own blood, whatever words this dragon speaks. Yeah, this is from the Fey Tarot. And if you haven't figured it out by now, that is one of my favorite tarots, and one in which I find over and over and over again these profound messages and places where initially when I saw the deck, I found them either just too lighthearted or a little too weird. So it took me a couple of years before I came back to it, and then I had this connection that was really very profound. So you will be seeing more from the Fey Tarot. I hope you check it out. And as I said, all those other lighthearted tarots out there that are carrying gems, absolute gems of wisdom and in the places where you would not expect them. This next card I want to look at is from the Halloween Tarot. And I really enjoy cards that come from sort of lighthearted or cartoonish decks, but that are very profound in their meanings. This Hierophant, we actually looked at the Emperor card from this deck as well, and I can't help but see a similarity in the fact that they're both sitting on thrones. And they are holding a scepter. This one is obviously the Christian cross scepter that you also saw in the Golden Tarot. I think that what I'd like to do actually is read the poem first, and then we'll talk about the card. The Mummy. As if it wasn't enough to be chained to a throne, now he's wrapped in white bandages. He holds a triple cross with a jack-o'-lantern grinning at the top. The throne is just as square as the one in the castle. There should be keys, he thinks, but he's lost them, or someone has. Two green cats with purple collars flash their yellow eyes, pull at the bandages trailing on the floor. The black cat at his shoulder looks on and waits. Roses and vines grow up the wall. Yards of linen trailing behind, he drops the triple cross, goes dancing with the jack-o'-lantern, bats flying behind him. The black cat meows approvingly at the two young cats, their fur darkening as they follow her into the night. I guess what I was thinking about was this card is so often thought about in terms of tradition. And tradition can be a good thing. I certainly have traditions in my life that I enjoy and that I would miss. And the problem with tradition is when it controls our life, when it becomes like this mummy suit, a straitjacket, and something that deadens us. And so when I saw this image, which of course, so much of this deck, it has such a sense of humor, and I have to say that I loved it for that. I felt bad for this Hierophant. This Hierophant doesn't want to be there. Someone's wrapped him up, taken out all of his organs, given him this cross with a jack-o'-lantern on the top. Yikes. And then there's these two green cats in the front. Instead of the two acolytes or monks or whatever, there's these two green cats. I can't help but feel like they're zombie cats, I guess, because of the color green. And they are, however, they have collars. They're somehow supposed to be in service to this mummy Hierophant. The black cat, who is present on, I think, all the cards, but at least most of the cards in this deck, is of course there on his shoulder looking on. There's these two, there's no pillars, or perhaps the pillars are the green where the vines are growing. I'm not sure, but there are these two urns, and they used to put the internal organs would be put into the urns. But the tops of these are very interesting because they're mice. Now in Egypt, where mummification was most often practiced, cats were sacred. There was a goddess, Bastet, who took the form of a cat. And part of the reason for that is because there was a terrible problem with vermin. And when they brought cats in, of course, the cats ate all the mice. And so they became sacred. She became the goddess Bastet. So these kind of very scary looking mice with the great big ears just seem appropriate to me for Halloween, like they're a scary thing. But they're gone. Those urns contain whatever insides they had. And then the lily and the rose is there, the vines are growing. There is hope for some kind of life going on. What I find most interesting is this little trailing piece of bandage that the cat is about to grab for. And you know what happens when cats find things like ribbons or toilet paper, or in this case, it would be the linens wrapping this mummy. And so in my poem, I imagine that these cats just totally unwrap him, and that when that happens, he drops the cross, takes off dancing with the jack-o'-lantern, all those bats following him out into the night. So he's letting go of tradition that has been confining him. And I think that is a very important and very profound aspect of this card, that tradition can be good, but it can also be confining, and sometimes you have to let go of it. And sometimes you need help with that. Interestingly, these cats are the ones that help. And that black cat up on his shoulder, in my poem, I imagine her as, you know, sort of being very approving of what these two younger cats did. And they then lose their green zombie-ish color and start turning into the darker colored cat like herself. In other words, somehow recover their connection to that black, unconscious, intuitive goddess energy. So I love this card, and I think it is a very liberating card. And I think, again, this is one of those instances where you have a lighthearted deck, a deck that's cartoonish, that if you really look at it has profound meaning. I want to mention quickly that the keys are there on the throne, which by the way is as square as that other throne. But he doesn't have the keys. The keys are just there drawn onto the thing. Well, we don't know that he has any keys at all. So this, to me, seems just very much like a card of liberation. Liberation from tradition that is stopping you from spiritual growth. And I would be delighted to get this card in a reading. I would be like, wow, there's stuff that I'm holding on to that I need to shed, things that are binding me, that are keeping me from my real self, that are keeping me from being on the journey that I want to be on, that I'm just doing because I was somehow told that's how I should do it, or that's the right way to do it, or that's what it means to be a woman, or that's what it means to be a big sister, or that's what it means to be whatever. Let go of those and drop that cross of tradition and take off and go dancing. Going dancing is always a good thing in my book. And I love it that they're going to go out, they're going to go dancing out into the night, where ironically they will be able to see more clearly than in this tomb, essentially. So, wow, moonlight's better than no light. At the end of the poem, I decided I wanted to have that black cat encourage those young kittens, those zombie kittens. And isn't it interesting that this sort of green color of sort of zombie-ish is used for those cats, which are the fill-ins for those two monks that we saw at the beginning. So there's an implication here somehow that if you are in total thrall to any given institution or system or tradition that binds you, you are like a zombie. and she meows approvingly. While you have been important, you have freed this person, this Hierophant. This person can now go and find their true self. And in fact, the cats then begin becoming their own true selves. They start growing their own dark fur so that they will be like her. So I just, I adore this card. It's another example of a lighthearted deck that, if you really look into it, has really profound meanings. And I'm very, very happy to have found it. This is the Hierophant from the Halloween Tarot. So that's it for today. Join me next time for the Lovers. And if you haven't had a chance to see the other earlier videos in this series, they start with the Fool. And I'm going to be doing the entire Major Arcana during the next year, both looking at the tarot itself as poetry and looking at the poetry that I have written in response to the art of tarot cards. Looking forward to seeing you next time and continuing this journey through the tarot.